Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is my college football summer school series on Cover 3. I bring on the team experts from the 24/7 sports staff and ask them the questions I care about. No fluff. Which players will be toughest to replace? What position groups are sneakily better or worse than I realize? We get you the scoop on each team in 20 minutes or less. Let's go. Hey guys, Bud Elliott here, back again with another episode of Summer School, and today we are talking a new Big 12 member in Cincinnati, and to do that, I'm going to bring on Chad Brendel of BearcatJournal. Chad, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. You guys do a tremendous job covering all things Cincinnati. A pretty nice year to cover last year, 9-3, played at a top 25, top 30 power rating level, so wasn't too fluky. But a wild final month or so with them moving to the Big 12, the last season in the American Conference, Luke Fickell going to Wisconsin and Cincinnati grabbing Scott Satterfield from Louisville. That had to be pretty wild to do.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's Cincinnati, so I've been doing this 16 years now. The one constant is change. So you kind of you get in that groove, and Luke Fickell had a fantastic 6-year run at Cincinnati, and decided he was ready to try something new and head out to Wisconsin. They go out, and I think one of the keys was they wanted to make sure they got a coach with some experience, a guy that had run a program at a pretty high level. And that's what Scott Satterfield had done in Louisville, and kind of was a surprise. The athletic director, John Cunningham, did a great job keeping it under wraps. And then next thing you know, Scott Satterfield was announced, and he's come in and he's done a good job in the transfer portal. They're off to a good start in the 24 recruiting class. So it's been positive so far.
For sure. It's hard to replace a guy like Fickell, but I think your point about the experience there makes a whole lot of sense. Because there is, if you go with a guy who's never coached before as a head coach and joining the new league, there's a bottom out chance that you just probably don't want to accept there. The offense last year did take a pretty good step back in the 60s in their opponent adjusted power ratings. Losing Desmond Ridder seemed like a fairly big deal. I know you chronicled that in the preseason. The run game also took a pretty big step back and was not all that effective on a down-and-down basis. And teams just, if you look at the coverage stuff on PFF and elsewhere, basically allowed them to throw the ball short if they could hit it and just tried to deny the explosive play over the top. Now they bring in Emory Jones with the Scott Satterfield offense. He just had a success with a running quarterback in Malik Cunningham. What are you expecting out of Emory Jones? And I guess I should ask you, is he actually penciled in as the starter?
Well, he would have been competing with Ben Bryant, and they competed in spring. And then coming out of spring, Ben Bryant entered the portal. Thought there was a pretty good chance he would be coming back, but then found a spot at Northwestern. So with Ben Bryant out of the picture, all signs do point to Emory Jones. He was a pretty good runner when he was at Florida, but he didn't run almost at all at Arizona State. So I don't know if that was just schematic or if he was trying to prove he was a pocket quarterback, but Scott Satterfield runs a run-based outside zone, zone read type offense. So I would expect Emory Jones to be asked to carry the football a lot more than he did a season ago, and maybe look a little bit more like the guy he was at Florida. I think he's gonna have to continue to improve as a passer, especially on the short and intermediate stuff. That looked to be a little bit of an issue in spring ball, some of the consistency there. But the way that this team looks and the way that they looked in the spring, I would expect a team that tries to run the ball, lean on the run, and use that to set up the pass. So that should play into Emory Jones' strengths as a quarterback.
At receiver, they lose Tucker and they lose Scott, two guys who I thought were just dynamite, especially at the American level. They bring in 6 transfers at receiver who I guess at the early onset, can we say are hits and are likely to play a lot?
Well, not James Wiggins. He's in the NFL.
The Louisville guy? D. Wiggins.
No, D. Wiggins. James Wiggins is a former Bearcat in the NFL. D. Wiggins looked to have a really good spring. The Donovan Ollie, a transfer out of Washington State, another guy that looked to solidify a starting spot. There are a little bit of questions still in the slot. Barry Jackson, a freshman, had a really good spring. So that's a name to keep an eye on. The interesting thing, I think, in that wide receiver room is, do they or do they not end up with Florida transfer Xavier Henderson? Because if they do, that gives them, a pretty strong look at that room. Not only did they lose Trey Tucker and Tyler Scott, they lost everybody. That wide receiver room has one returning player in Chris Scott. The entire wide receiver room has flipped. So that's been a big challenge for this staff. That has been a huge point of emphasis in the transfer portal, is trying to restock that receiver room. With D. Wiggins and with Donovan Ollie, I think they've got two top of the roster type guys. And then if you add Xavier Henderson into that, he's been crystal balled to Cincinnati. A lot of indications are it's going to be Cincinnati. He's a quiet kid. I think there's a chance that it's one of those situations where he doesn't even announce. He's just in class one day coming up here this summer. We've seen that a couple times with the portal, where guys just aren't interested in making a scene of things or making it public, and they just show up and go to school. I think that might be the case with Xavier Henderson. But if you add him into that room starts to look quite a bit more reliable.
If you think back to the 2020, I want to make sure I have my timeline right here. Yeah, so if you think back to the 2021 squad, Tyler Harrell on Louisville was Satterfield did a nice job using him as that super speed deep threat guy, and Henderson obviously was a pretty good track star. I live down here in Florida, so I'm very familiar with his track game. You can kind of pull some stuff from what they did with Tyler Harrell. Harrell transferred to Alabama last cycle and didn't get to play much for the Tide. He got hurt and has since transferred on again. But certainly Satterfield knows how to use a deep threat off all that play action stuff they like to run, and could set up some easy throws for Emory Jones. I could see that being a big help.
If they play together, so they're two guys that know each other as well in Florida.
Right, exactly. Now, 5 of the top 6 offensive linemen are also gone. I feel like we're just talking about an entirely new team here.
The offense is almost brand new.
I mean, this is a ton, and they do land 3 transfers, I think.
Yeah.
Is this? I don't think this line was amazing last year. They had some guys who got voted honorable mention All American Conference. Are you expecting a step back here?
It's going to be interesting. I mean, they definitely underperformed last year, because if you go back to the 21 season, they had 3 first-team all-conference linemen that returned, and that were back on that line last year, and they just didn't. I don't know if it was they changed offensive line coaches. I don't know if it was not having Ron Crook, who was there before. He's now the offensive line coach at Virginia Tech. I don't know if that changeover to Mike Cummings never really took place. Didn't take hold, I guess, is the right answer, or the right word. They should be pretty good at center. Gavin Gerhardt is back there. You get Trevor Radosevich out of the Ivy League that is slotted in at one of the guards. Luke Kandra from Louisville will be probably the other starting guard. So I think the interior should be really good. The question is going to be at tackle. They brought in a transfer in Philip Wilder. They just got a transfer from Kentucky that is a little bit small, but has played tackle, at least has some experience there. He's only 6'3", but does have long arms. And his name is slipping my brain right now. DeAndre Buford.
Sorry. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So, and then, from there, you're kind of trying to figure out what exactly is your plan at left tackle. You've got a returning guy there that has struggled a little bit, John Williams, in picking up left tackle. Do you maybe see if you can fit Goodwin in at left tackle? Then what do you do at right tackle? Or maybe Philip Wilder moves over. And then you also have Cam Jones, a name you might remember. He was a 4-star quarterback and switched to tight end. And then now he's a 6'8", 340-pound offensive lineman. So good size and athleticism. Just he hasn't taken really any snaps yet. So you've got bodies there, but you don't have anybody that's proven. You don't feel nearly as good about the outside as you do, those three guys that you've got on the inside.
That's fantastic. Dang. Okay. And it is very, very difficult to find tackles in the transfer portal, honestly.
Schools do a lot to make sure they don't enter the transfer portal.
Yes, they do. Yeah. And the ones that go in, I mean, it's very hard to find those. And like some teams, I think, do a lot to make sure that like the guys that aren't even starting but have a real future, they make sure that they lock them down too.
Yep.
As well. The defense carried this team last year pretty heavily, and they have some interesting losses and some interesting pieces coming back. The big one, to me at least, although I guess not to the NFL, Ivan Pace being gone. This dude was all over the field. 131 tackles. Havoc rate was off the charts. I guess the NFL doesn't feel quite the same way, but I mean, I watched a decent bit of Cincinnati. He really, people were not able to block him.
It's just super disruptive.
Yeah. They also lose what? Wilson Huber, another linebacker. What do they have now?
Bush,
yeah, like
Javon Hicks.
What do they have kind of at backer and edge?
So Dorian Jones came in from Louisville. He was a guy that Louisville wanted to keep and looked to be like he was going to be a starter at Louisville next season. He came with the new staff. He'll be one of the middle linebackers. The other one looks like right now it's going to be Jack Dingle, who is a really highly touted 3-star kid out of Louisville Trinity that the Satterfield staff was familiar with. They recruited him hard at Louisville, but his dad played at Cincinnati back in the late 80s. So he was a legacy. He looks to be, I mean, he's 6'4", 6'4 and a half, 230 pounds, big physical kid. So those two guys are probably going to be your starters in the middle. It's funny you mentioned Ivan Pace. His brother, Deshaun, who was phenomenal and had 110 tackles, I think 107 tackles in 2021, took a little bit of a back seat to his older brother last year. And they've kind of moved Deshaun from that strong side linebacker spot to now he's kind of they call it the star position, which is a nickel essentially. But he is trimmed down. He looked great in spring ball, playing a new position. So he's going to be in the nickel. And then the weak side linebacker, Dan Greziak, is one of the highest rated by Pro Football Focus, one of the highest rated returning edge rushers in the country. He's listed as a defensive lineman, but they're playing him at more of an outside stand-up linebacker. So when you look at it from the field, it looks more like an old 3-4.
Okay.
But it's not technically, because one of the guys is more of a safety hybrid and the other guy is more of a defensive end hybrid. So a lot of times there's only two actual like true linebacker positions on the field in this defense. But I think they're comfortable with the two guys they have.
That makes sense. Up front, I mean, you get Phillips back, you get Briggs back. You have to feel decent about the interior, especially if Corleone takes a step, right? Like this should be the most dependable part of the defense, or at least the one you can count on the most right now.
And you also have Malik Van back.
That's right.
Who was hurt last year and missed. I think he got to the first quarter of the second game and tore his pec. And then so he's going to be back as well. That's by far your deepest unit on the team without question. And you still got some guys behind them. You've got Justin Watley, you've got Jamal Williams, you've got Rob Jackson, all looking to kind of crack into that rotation and provide depth. Derek Shepard, who was at one point a 4-star guy, another Ohio defensive tackle behind Corleone. So there's a lot of depth there. And if they play into that strength, which Louisville led the country in sacks last year.
Yeah.
So if they play into that strength, they should be pretty strong up front.
They're going to have to generate a pass rush, I would assume, with what they lose there in the secondary. Javon Hicks is gone. Shepard's gone. Anquan Bush, I believe, is also gone, right? So they took 2 transfers, and at least 2, maybe more now. What's the secondary looking like, and are they going to be able to play the style that they want to play?
I think Jordan Young, who transferred in a corner, is going to be excellent. I think he looked really, really good in spring. I know Florida did not want to lose him. Another guy that, Cincinnati was able to – I think that's kind of the thing you have to find out in the portal these days is, was the school looking to move on from this kid,
Yes.
or was it a kid that they were trying to keep? And I think that's important when you're assessing, what your transfer haul looks like. Jordan Young was the guy that Florida wanted to keep, and he looked really, really good. They have a 4-star opposite him that is returning and has kind of been, I don't want to say buried because he played a lot last year, especially in the nickel, and Sammy Anderson. He's moving back outside to play the field spot. And he had a pretty good spring. I think him and Justin Harris and a couple others will compete for that field spot. Safety, that's going to be interesting. You lost a guy that they thought was going to be an impact guy in Armorion Smith. He transferred at the end of the spring. Brian Threats returns as a starter, and it looks like Taj Ward, who feels like he got here when Tommy Tuberville was here. He's been like a utility. He's played nickel. He's played outside. He's played safety. He looks like one of those safeties, along with DJ Young that transferred in from Arizona State. Those three guys between Threats, Young, and Ward look like they're going to be rotating through at safety. So there's
that
talent
has to be the
there.
COVID year for Ward, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think he was 2018 or 2017.
Yeah,
2017. So
he's a seventh-year guy then. Okay.
It's sixth or seventh, and I don't know. It just feels like he's been here for a long time.
Nice. Absolutely. Chad, where would you say is the biggest drop-off between the quality of starter and the backups? Which position group? And not quarterback, since everybody would think, most people would say quarterback if they could.
Yeah, that would be the simple one. Maybe a position that we haven't talked about yet at tight end. They have a young guy that looks to be kind of next in line. He was behind Josh Wiley and Lenny Taylor, who are both in the NFL now. Last year, and dealt with some injury issues, but his name's Shimon Mateer. You might remember him being a Florida guy. This kid's 6'5", 250 pounds, and runs, high 4.4, low 4.5. Big, physical, can play in line, can catch. A really, really strong tight end option. And Satterfield does like to use the tight end a lot, as most run-based systems do. The question from there is what's behind him. And, they went and got a kid named Joey Belgian from Western Kentucky in the transfer portal, and then he blew out his knee in the spring. Oh. And he was looking to be that guy that was, the 1-2 punch with Mateer. Now you're relying on maybe a guy named Peyton Singletary, who is more of a pass catching, Josh Wiley type, not quite the 6'7", monster that Wiley was, but a guy that can make plays down the field with his hands, but you're not going to use him a ton blocking. From there, I mean, it's up in the air. They do not have a lot of depth in that room at this point. Luke Fickell had 2 tight ends committed for 2023, and both of those guys left, when the coaching change happened, and ended up signing elsewhere. So that's a room that has been a really important part of what Cincinnati does. Travis Kelce, Brent Selleck, the list of Cincinnati tight ends goes on and on. There's one guy that looks like he's next in line, but there's not a lot behind him that has proven itself to be, a weapon. So that's one room when we get to summer camp that I'm going to definitely have a very close eye on to see how that progression has happened over the summer.
No doubt about it. Chad, Bearcat Journal, really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Appreciate it, bud.